You're not as smart as you think science explains. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Most of us think we're above average. We believe we're better drivers than other people, better communicators, better thinkers, better judges of character. And it's not arrogance exactly, it's just this subtle, constant bias that our perception is more accurate than everyone else's. We trust our minds. We trust our instincts. We trust our experiences. But what if that trust is the very thing misleading us? What if the confidence we feel in our own intelligence is exactly what reveals how little we actually understand? That's the genius and the danger of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's not just a psychological curiosity. It's a mirror. And when you really look into it, it changes everything. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with low ability, knowledge, or experience in a particular area overestimate their own competence. But what makes it even more wild is that those who are truly skilled or knowledgeable tend to underestimate themselves. So the people who know the least are often the most confident, while those who know the most are often the most humble. It sounds backward, but it makes perfect sense when you understand how the mind works. To know something deeply is to see its complexity. To grasp how little you truly control or understand is, ironically, a sign that you're becoming wiser. But when you know very little, you don't see that complexity. You think you've got it all figured out. And that illusion of understanding feels just like real intelligence.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
This is where science meets philosophy in the most haunting way. Because what Dunning and Kruger discovered through experimentation, Plato, Socrates, and countless other thinkers had already sensed through introspection. Socrates famously said, "I know that I know nothing." That wasn't just poetic humility. That was intellectual awareness. It was the realization that knowledge isn't a trophy, it's a horizon. The closer you get to truth, the more you realize how much lies beyond your grasp. But most people never get close enough to feel that. They stop at the first layer of understanding and mistake it for the whole truth. They confuse clarity with completeness. And from there, confidence blooms not from wisdom, but from ignorance. Now, let's get personal. How often have you been absolutely sure of something only to be proven wrong later? It could have been a belief you held for years, a judgment you made about someone, a decision you felt was obviously right. And when the truth finally emerged, it wasn't just surprising, it was humbling. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect in real time. And here's the kicker: if you're not regularly experiencing that kind of humbling, it's not because you're always right. It's probably because you're not digging deep enough. You're living in the illusion of certainty not because you're wise, but because you haven't questioned yourself deeply enough to realize how little you know. This isn't just a psychological phenomenon. It's a spiritual one. Because to live wisely is to live in a constant dance with uncertainty. It's to ask, what am I missing? What don't I see? Those questions are not signs of weakness. They're signs of strength. They're what separate the thinker from the talker, the learner from the loudmouth, the philosopher from the fool. But in a world that rewards visibility over depth, it's easy for the loudest, most confident voices to drown out the quiet ones. And that's the danger. When confidence becomes the currency of credibility, we end up trusting the wrong people not because they're right, but because they sound right. And here's where things get even more disturbing. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't something that happens to dumb people. It happens to everyone, including you, including me, because it's built into how the brain processes information. We are wired to assume that our perceptions are accurate, that our understanding is solid, that our opinions are valid. And unless we actively challenge those assumptions, we live in a loop of self-confirmation. We reinforce our own illusions, and we call it truth. That's why this isn't just an interesting concept, it's a call to action. If you care about truth, if you care about growth, if you care about becoming someone who actually thinks and not just reacts, you need to develop a new kind of humility. Not the fake, performative kind that says I might be wrong but doesn't really believe it. I'm talking about real cognitive humility. The kind that's willing to say, I don't know enough to be this certain. I haven't seen the full picture. I need to learn more. And that mindset doesn't make you weaker. It makes you dangerous because it means you're a threat to the illusion. You're a person who can't be easily manipulated. You're harder to deceive by others and by yourself. So ask yourself, what am I most confident about right now? And what if I'm wrong? Not just a little wrong, but deeply, profoundly, fundamentally mistaken. How would I even know? Would I be willing to find out? Because if you're not willing to ask that, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just something you've heard about. It's something you're living inside of. And that's the most dangerous place to be, not because you're unintelligent, but because you've stopped questioning your intelligence. And that leads us to the next stage. If we can't trust our confidence, and if our perception of our own competence is so easily warped, then how do we know what's real? How do we distinguish between illusion and insight? The confidence trap. Why feeling smart isn't the same as being smart. Let's talk about confidence. Not the kind that's earned through discipline and experience, but the kind that feels real just because it's loud, fast, and certain. The kind we mistake for intelligence. The kind we reward in classrooms, meetings, social media debates, and everyday conversations. The confidence trap is one of the most deceptive forces in your life. It's the gap between feeling smart and being smart, and most of us don't even know we're caught in it because the feeling is so convincing. You speak with conviction, people nod, you win arguments. But none of that means you're right. It only means you're confident. And the Dunning-Kruger effect shows us just how often those two things come apart. The less you know, the easier it is to oversimplify. And the simpler something feels, the more certain you become. It's a loop, a trap, and it's everywhere. Think about how many systems in our world reward confidence over accuracy. In politics, the candidate who speaks in short, punchy slogans is more likely to win than the one who explains complex policy in a nuanced way. In business, the bold pitch often beats the cautious one, even when the cautious one is more realistic. In social media, the hot take gets more engagement than the thoughtful essay. And in personal life, people who speak quickly and assertively are more likely to be believed even when they're dead wrong. Why? Because we're wired to associate certainty with credibility. We assume that if someone feels sure, they must know something we don't. But that's not true. Certainty is a feeling, not a fact. And trusting it blindly is how we end up following the wrong leaders, believing the wrong narratives, and ignoring the people who are actually worth listening to. Now here's the real trap. Once you feel smart, you stop learning. That's the bitter truth. Confidence creates comfort, and comfort kills curiosity. But if you think you already know enough, You won't seek new information, especially if that information might contradict what you believe. You won't question your assumptions, because assumptions feel like knowledge. You won't listen deeply, because you're too busy waiting for your turn to talk. This is intellectual stagnation disguised as self-assurance. And the worst part is, it feels good. It feels like certainty. It feels like control. But it's a cage. So how do you break out of that cage? How do you avoid the confidence trap without falling into the opposite extreme: paralysis, self-doubt, indecision? It starts with one powerful shift, realizing that real intelligence isn't about having answers. It's about asking better questions. It's about curiosity, not certainty. Wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It listens more than it speaks. It doubts more than it asserts. It's not afraid to say "I don't know," not because it's weak, but because it understands how much it doesn't know. That's not insecurity. That's strength. That's the kind of mind that grows. But we rarely celebrate that kind of mind. We celebrate the confident one, the flashy one, the one that sounds smart. And in doing so, we train ourselves and each other to prioritize appearance over substance. We build a culture that equates confidence with competence, loudness with leadership, speed with intelligence. And then we wonder why we keep making bad decisions, why we keep following people who don't deliver, why we keep falling for the same lies. It's because we're choosing style over depth, emotion over thought, feeling smart over being smart. This is where philosophy becomes your weapon. And philosophy teaches you how to think, not just what to think. It teaches you how to ask questions, how to hold contradictions, how to resist the seduction of easy answers. It teaches you to slow down, to look under the surface, to challenge the feeling of certainty when it shows up. Because the feeling itself might be the only thing standing between you and the truth. So ask yourself, where in my life is confidence outpacing competence? Where am I mistaking the feeling of clarity for actual understanding? And deeper still, what would I see if I allowed myself to not know? Who would I become if I stopped performing intelligence and started pursuing it instead? You see, intelligence isn't a state. It's a process. It's a relationship with knowledge. And like all relationships, it requires humility, attention, and effort. You don't become smart once and for all. You keep becoming, but only if you resist the illusion of already being there. And that takes us to the heart of the matter. If confidence can lie to us, and intelligence isn't a fixed trait, then what's the real path to wisdom? What kind of mindset protects us from the Dunning-Kruger effect and helps us grow beyond it? Climbing the mountain of stupidity, how true wisdom begins with knowing you're wrong. There's a strange thing that happens when you begin to study yourself honestly. You don't become more certain, you become more unsure. You don't feel smarter, you feel smaller. You glance over the edge of your own ignorance and realize you've been standing on a mountain made of fog. That's the beginning of wisdom. It's not a glorious moment. It's humbling. It's often embarrassing. You start to see the conversations where you spoke with too much authority, the topics you weighed in on without understanding, the times you dismissed others because they didn't speak with the same confidence you did. You realize how often you mistook your own belief for fact, how often you defended what you didn't fully grasp. You realize, in short, that you've been wrong a lot. And that realization is the first honest step toward becoming someone who can grow. This moment, this confrontation with your own limits, is what some call Mount Stupid. It's the peak of the Dunning-Kruger graph, where confidence is highest and knowledge is lowest. We've all been there. It's the moment you learn a little about something and suddenly feel like an expert. It's the first time you read a book on psychology and start diagnosing your friends. The first time you hear about a philosophical idea and think you've found the secret to life. You feel empowered, enlightened, even superior. But the truth is, you're in the most dangerous position you can be in. You know just enough to be confident, but not enough to see how little you know. Here's the trap, though. Most people stay on that peak. They build houses there. They plant flags. Because stepping off the mountain means admitting you were wrong. And that's hard. It bruises the ego. It forces you to face the fact that your thoughts, your beliefs, your identity might be built on shaky ground. For many, that's intolerable, so they double down. They argue louder. They seek out people who agree with them and block out the rest. They mistake reinforcement for truth. And the higher they climb on the illusion of certainty, the further they fall from actual understanding. But for the few who are willing to descend from the mountain to say, "I don't know enough," to question their beliefs, to seek correction instead of validation, a new world opens up. It's not comfortable. It's not easy, but it's real. And in that world, learning becomes a lifelong journey, not a destination. You stop trying to be right all the time and start trying to see more clearly. You stop arguing to win and start listening to understand. You stop performing intelligence and start embodying it. And here's the paradox. The more you do this, the more competent you actually become, but the less confident you feel. This is what's so strange. Wisdom doesn't feel like certainty. It feels like openness, like space, like being okay with not knowing. But the wisest people you'll meet are often the ones who hesitate before they answer, who ask more questions than they give conclusions, who speak softly because they understand the weight of words. They've climbed down the mountain and into the valley of humility. And from there they begin the real ascent, not toward louder opinions, but toward deeper insight. So how do you start that climb? First, by catching yourself in the act. When you feel that rush of certainty, pause. Ask, where is this coming from? Do I truly understand this, or do I just feel like I do? Seek out opposing views not to refute them, but to understand them. Read things that make you uncomfortable. But surround yourself with people who challenge you, not just those who agree with you. And most importantly, celebrate being wrong. Not because it's fun, but because it means you've found a limit, and limits are where growth begins. Here's something to consider. What if your strongest beliefs are the ones most overdue for questioning? What if you've spent years defending ideas that were never fully yours to begin with, ideas you inherited, absorbed, or copied without realizing? What if your certainty is a disguise for fear, a fear of being exposed, of being vulnerable, of not knowing? This is the real work. Not collecting facts, not winning debates, but dismantling the illusion that you're already wise. Because only then can wisdom find you. But if wisdom begins with realizing you're wrong, what does it mean to become right? What does mastery look like once you've dismantled your illusions? Beyond the illusion, how mastery emerges from humility and curiosity. Once you've stepped off the peak of false confidence and into the valley of humility, something subtle starts to shift. You begin to realize that intelligence isn't about certainty, it's about adaptability. It's not about having all the answers, but about knowing how to ask better questions, True mastery, the kind that's quiet, deep, and transformative, doesn't feel like superiority. It feels like curiosity. And curiosity, when it's real, is fueled by humility. That's the great irony of wisdom. You don't arrive at it by trying to be wise. You arrive by recognizing how much you don't know and then moving toward that unknown with openness, not fear. This is where the illusion truly dissolves. The illusion that smart people are the ones who talk the most, the loudest, or with the most certainty. The illusion that being right is the same as being wise. The illusion that your ego needs to defend every belief you've ever held. When you let go of those illusions, you start to see that the most brilliant minds are often the most gentle. Not because they're unsure, but because they understand the cost of speaking too quickly. They've tasted the limits of knowledge. They've seen how easily confidence can become arrogance, how quickly clarity can become delusion. Mastery is quiet because it listens. It listens to others, to the world, and to the self. It's not passive, it's present. It pays attention to subtlety, to contradiction, to nuance. It doesn't need to win arguments because it's not playing that game. It's playing a longer game, one that's not about domination, but about understanding, one that doesn't fear being wrong, but welcomes it as a guidepost toward better thinking. And here's what's truly powerful. When you live this way, when you move through life with humility and curiosity, you become magnetic. People trust you, not because you claim to have all the answers, but because you're honest about the questions. They feel safe around you, not because you're perfect, but because they know you're real. In a world full of noise, depth becomes rare. And in a world addicted to certainty, your curiosity becomes revolutionary. But let's be clear, this isn't an excuse to doubt yourself into paralysis. Humility isn't weakness, it's strength under control. It's the willingness to slow down, to admit imperfection, to keep learning even when you're tired of learning. It's also the discipline to take action without needing to be 100% sure. Because you won't always be. The world is too complex, too fast, too uncertain. But curiosity helps you adapt. It helps you stay responsive instead of reactive. It helps you grow with intention, not just by accident. So what does this look like in practice? It means journaling your assumptions and asking where they came from. It means reading ideas that contradict your worldview and sitting with the discomfort. It means asking yourself regularly, what am I missing? What am I wrong about today that I won't realize until tomorrow? And maybe the most important one, who do I become when I stop needing to be right all the time? Because that's the real power of transcending the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's not just about avoiding error. It's about evolving your relationship with truth. You stop seeing knowledge as a possession, something to hoard or flaunt. You start seeing it as a path, a practice, a process of refinement. And every mistake, every misconception, every moment of I was wrong becomes part of the sharpening. You realize that mastery isn't a place you reach, it's a way you live. So here's the invitation, walk that path. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Let your humility be your compass. Let your curiosity be your engine. Let your mistakes be your teachers. And remember this, you're not as smart as you think. But that's not a problem. That's a gift, because it means there's still room to grow, still more to learn, still more to become. And maybe the smartest thing you'll ever do is finally admit how much you don't know.